As the snow fell softly outside, the warm glow of the mansion's lights contrasted sharply with the cold, quiet street. It was Thanksgiving night, and inside, the billionaire sat alone at a long, polished dining table. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. He stared at his plate, untouched, his mind distant, lost in thoughts of a past full of empty celebrations. His extravagant home felt hollow, the rich aroma of the holiday meal barely making an impact on his lonely heart. Suddenly, a faint sound interrupted the silence, a soft knock on the grand door. Startled, the billionaire stood up, unsure of who could be visiting at this hour. He opened the door to find a young black girl standing on the threshold, her small form framed by the biting cold of the night. She was bundled in a worn jacket, her hair pulled into neat braids, eyes wide with curiosity but tinged with sadness. She stared up at him, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the cold air. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" she asked, the words hanging in the air, unexpected and strange. The billionaire blinked, taken aback. He was not used to such directness, especially from a child so young, standing at his doorstep. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The girl's presence, so out of place in his world of wealth and isolation, stunned him. She wasn't asking for anything, just an invitation. The billionaire's mind raced. Was she lost? Was this some kind of prank? But there was no malice in her eyes, only a quiet hope, a longing for something more than just food. His gaze flickered behind her, to the dark street, empty and cold. His mansion, full of all the things money could buy, suddenly felt more like a cage. The girl shifted, sensing his hesitation, and added softly, "My mom and I. We don't have anyone this year. It's just the two of us." Her voice wavered with vulnerability, a simple statement that carried the weight of years of unspoken loneliness. The billionaire stood frozen, his heart unexpectedly tugged by her words. He had everything except for what mattered most. He opened the door wider, stepping aside. "Come in," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The girl smiled, a small but genuine expression of relief. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her, leaving the cold world outside. The girl stepped into the warm glow of the mansion, the air inside a stark contrast to the biting cold of the night. She hesitated at the threshold, her eyes wide with wonder, unsure of how to navigate this foreign, lavish space. The billionaire stood aside, allowing her in, the sound of her soft footsteps echoing on the marble floor. His eyes followed her, a strange sense of discomfort rising within him. The girl, so small and out of place in such opulence, made him feel the weight of his solitude more than ever. "Are you sure it's okay?" she asked, her voice timid but hopeful. Her eyes flicked to the grand table, set with an extravagant feast that seemed too much for just one person, let alone a stranger. The billionaire, still in shock, nodded. "Of course, please, sit down," he said, his voice softer than he intended. He motioned to the empty chair at the table. As she sat, her gaze moved to the empty chairs surrounding them. The silence in the room now growing heavier. "I guess it's just you and me," she said quietly, her words simple but laden with a kind of melancholy that struck him. He paused, his eyes scanning her face for any hint of bitterness or resentment. There was none, only a quiet acceptance, as if this was simply the way things were. "My name is Claire," she continued, after a brief silence. "What's yours?" The billionaire blinked, startled by the question. It wasn't often that people asked for his name in such a direct, unassuming way. "It's Jonathan," he replied, his voice carrying a slight edge of surprise. The girl Claire nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Nice to meet you, Jonathan," she said. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. I didn't mean to intrude, but my mom and we haven't had anyone to spend Thanksgiving with for a long time. It's just been us, you know?" Jonathan's heart tightened at her words. He glanced at the table, at the feast laid out before them, and suddenly it felt hollow. What was all this wealth worth if it couldn't fill the empty space in his life? "I understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected. "It's been a while since I've had a proper Thanksgiving, too." The truth hung between them, unspoken but understood. Claire looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to read him, to understand the man behind the polished surface. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. He was used to being in control, used to having every moment of his life meticulously planned. But this felt different. "Do you come here often?" Claire asked after a moment. Jonathan blinked, caught off guard by the question. No, he replied slowly, unsure how to explain. "I don't come here much anymore." He gestured around the room. "It's just too much sometimes." He paused, wondering if he was making sense. Too many people, too much noise. "I think I forgot what it was like to actually enjoy these things." Claire nodded, as if she understood. There was a quiet empathy in her eyes, an unspoken recognition of the same kind of loneliness that Jonathan felt deep inside. She reached for the glass of water in front of her, her hands shaking slightly as she brought it to her lips. Jonathan watched her for a moment before speaking again. "I used to think that the more I had, the better my life would be," he said softly, almost to himself. "But now, I don't know. I think I've been missing out on the things that really matter." Claire looked up at him, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She placed her glass down gently and smiled. "It's funny," she said quietly. "I always thought the more people had, the happier they were. But sometimes, they're just as lonely as anyone else." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat as he realized how true her words were. This young girl, with so little, had somehow captured a truth he had been blind to for years. He didn't respond right away, the weight of her words sinking in. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, he saw not just the small girl sitting before him, but someone who, despite the hardships, still held on to hope. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You're wise beyond your years, Claire," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. She shrugged modestly, her cheeks turning pink. "I guess I've had to learn a lot." There was a quiet moment between them, the sound of the fire crackling in the hearth the only noise in the room. Then Claire spoke again, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Is it okay if I ask, why don't you ever have anyone here? Don't you have friends or family?" Jonathan's chest tightened at the question. He wanted to give her an answer, but the truth felt too raw. "I used to," he said finally. "But I don't know. People change. They move on, and you're left behind, wondering if you'll ever matter again." Claire's eyes softened. "But you do matter, Jonathan," she said, her voice gentle but certain. "I think maybe you just need to see it for yourself." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat at her words. How could someone so young, so seemingly small in the grand scheme of things, be the one to see him so clearly? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. As they sat there, a sense of peace began to settle over the room, as if the weight of years of loneliness had been lifted, if only for a moment. Claire's simple invitation, her quiet kindness, had begun to unravel the walls Jonathan had built around himself. And for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next morning, the air was crisp and fresh, the sun just beginning to rise over the quiet estate. The light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows on the polished floor of the grand mansion. Jonathan sat at the dining table, a cup of coffee in front of him, staring out the window. He had barely slept the night before, his mind replaying the conversation with Claire over and over again. He had never expected such a simple invitation to have such a profound impact on him. Claire and her mother had left the mansion after dinner the previous night, but there was something about their presence that lingered. As the minutes passed, Jonathan found himself thinking about how empty his life had become. He had built empires, gathered wealth, and acquired everything he thought would bring him happiness. Yet, it had left him hollow, alone in a house filled with things he didn't need. He looked down at the coffee in his hands, his fingers wrapped around the warm mug. The sound of footsteps broke his thoughts. Claire entered the room, her small frame barely visible against the towering doorway. She hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, her eyes meeting his. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," Jonathan replied, surprised at how natural the exchange felt. She moved toward the table, her gaze drifting to the untouched plate of food before her. Jonathan noticed the way she looked at the food, as if she were unsure whether it was meant for her. "You can sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I'm not going to bite. Claire smiled shyly and took a seat. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Jonathan watched her as she looked around the room, taking in the grandeur of the mansion, the chandeliers, the marble floors, and the walls lined with priceless art. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her fingers playing with the sleeve of her jacket. I didn't think it would be like this, she said, her voice quiet but curious. I mean, I knew it would be big, but I didn't know it would feel so empty. Jonathan froze. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had always seen the mansion as a symbol of his success, his hard work paying off in the form of luxury and comfort. But Claire was right. There was something missing. Something that couldn't be bought. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the silence between them. Yeah, I know what you mean, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I guess I've never really thought about it that way. Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding that made him uncomfortable. She leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. It's nice, though, she said, her voice hopeful. I mean, you have everything here. It must be nice to not have to worry about food or a place to sleep. Jonathan's heart clenched. He could see the way she was looking at him, as if she were trying to find something more, something deeper. He nodded slowly, not sure how to respond. Yeah, it's nice, he said after a pause, but it's not everything. There's more to life than things. Claire smiled softly, her gaze shifting to the windows where the morning light danced on the lawn outside. I think I understand, she said, her voice gentle. Sometimes, having everything just makes you forget what really matters, like family, friends, people who care about you. Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat. He had built his life around the idea of success, of achieving greatness, but in doing so, he had forgotten the one thing that truly made life worth living: connection. Claire's words seemed to open something inside of him, something he had long buried. He had always been so focused on the future, on what he could achieve, that he had lost sight of the present moment. He looked at her, the small girl who had come into his life so unexpectedly, and realized that she had already shown him something he had been missing. You're right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've spent so much time trying to build something. But I forgot what really matters. Claire nodded, her eyes soft and full of empathy. It's okay, she said, her tone comforting. We all forget sometimes, but it's never too late to remember. Jonathan felt a tear slip down his cheek, surprising him. He wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by the sudden rush of emotions. Claire didn't say anything, but she reached across the table, her small hand resting gently on his. He looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. In that moment, Jonathan realized that he wasn't alone. He had Claire, and somehow, that was enough. The mansion felt a little less empty now, a little warmer. And for the first time in years, Jonathan allowed himself to truly feel what it meant to be alive. The next few days passed quietly, but the stillness in the mansion was no longer oppressive. Jonathan found himself waking up earlier, feeling a strange sense of anticipation. Claire and her mother had come to mean more to him than he had anticipated. He had spent so many years disconnected from those around him, hiding behind his wealth and power. And now, for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly living. The mansion was still grand, still opulent, but it was starting to feel like home. It wasn't the kind of home he had imagined when he first acquired the estate. It wasn't the luxury or the possessions that made it feel that way. It was the presence of Claire and her mother, their warmth filling the empty spaces. One evening, Claire and her mother were invited to dinner again. This time, it was different. Jonathan had set the table himself, taking the time to cook a simple meal, nothing extravagant, but something from the heart. As he plated the food, he noticed Claire's mother, Sarah, sitting on the couch, a tired look on her face, but a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Claire, too, seemed at ease, her laughter filling the air as she joked about the food. It was a far cry from the somber, solitary dinners Jonathan used to have. It smells wonderful in here, Sarah remarked, her voice soft but genuine. Jonathan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. He hadn't realized how much he missed the simple act of sharing a meal with someone, of having someone to talk to laugh with. The night passed in an easy rhythm. They talked about their days, the little things that made up their lives. Claire talked about school, her friends, her dreams for the future. Jonathan listened intently, genuinely interested in what she had to say. He found himself laughing, his heart light, something he hadn't felt in years. As the night came to a close, and Claire and her mother stood up to leave, Jonathan found himself feeling a pang of unease. He wasn't ready for them to go. "You don't have to leave yet," he said, his voice unsteady. Sarah paused, looking at him with a soft, understanding smile. "It's okay, Jonathan. We're grateful for everything," she said, "but we don't want to overstay our welcome." Jonathan nodded, though a part of him didn't want them to leave. He had grown accustomed to their presence, their laughter, the way they made the mansion feel alive again. But he understood. They had their own lives to return to, their own struggles. They weren't his to keep. "I know," he said, his voice quiet. "But if you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I want to help, in any way I can." Claire looked up at him, her eyes bright with sincerity. "We know," she said, "and thank you. You've done more than enough already." With that, Claire and her mother gathered their things and headed for the door. Jonathan followed them to the front porch, watching as they stepped into the cold night. The air was sharp, but it felt different now. The emptiness he had once felt was gone, replaced by something warmer. He stood there for a moment, watching them walk down the path toward the street, before stepping back inside the mansion. As the door clicked shut behind him, he realized that the house wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't just filled with expensive furniture and priceless artifacts. It was filled with memories, with moments that had started to matter. The loneliness that had once consumed him seemed to fade away, replaced by a sense of purpose, a sense of connection. Jonathan walked back into the living room and sat down, a deep sense of peace settling over him. He thought about the Thanksgiving dinner, about how Claire had invited him to join her and her mother, and how that simple gesture had changed everything. He had been searching for something his whole life, something that all the wealth and power in the world couldn't provide. He had been searching for meaning, for connection, for a reason to believe that life was worth living, and now he had found it. Jonathan closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He wasn't alone anymore. He didn't need all the things he thought he wanted. He had what truly mattered. He had family, even if it wasn't the kind he had expected. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. As the days passed, Jonathan found himself more and more immersed in the presence of Claire and her mother. Their visits had become a routine, a comforting part of his days. The mansion, once a cold and empty place, now felt different, full of life, laughter, and even the smallest moments of warmth. It wasn't just about the meals they shared or the conversations that flowed so easily. It was the sense of connection he had longed for, the kind of connection that money couldn't buy. It was the kind of connection that made him realize how much he had missed, how much he had taken for granted. One evening, as Claire and her mother sat in the living room, Jonathan could sense a change in the air. There was something different about their visit this time. Claire's mother, Sarah, had been quiet all evening, her usual warmth replaced with a distant look in her eyes. Jonathan noticed it but didn't want to press. He had grown to respect their privacy, understanding that not everything needed to be said out loud. But he couldn't ignore the way Sarah's shoulders slumped, the way her eyes kept darting away when he looked in her direction. It was as if there was something she wanted to share, but couldn't. After dinner, as the three of them sat around the fireplace, the warmth from the fire doing little to ease the tension, Jonathan decided to break the silence. "Sarah, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah looked up, startled by his question, as if she hadn't realized how much her behavior had changed. She smiled faintly, but there was no hiding the worry in her eyes. "I'm fine, Jonathan," she said, her voice soft but strained. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, but it's hard to find the right words." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He had a feeling he knew where this was going, but he didn't want to assume. He waited for her to continue, giving her the space to speak. Claire, who had been quietly listening, looked at her mother with concern. "Mom, what is it?" she asked, her voice small but full of care. Sarah looked at her daughter, then back at Jonathan, and took a deep breath. "I've been struggling with something for a while now," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "It's about the way we've been living, about how we've been getting by." Jonathan furrowed his brow, his curiosity piqued. He knew they weren't well off, but he didn't realize how much Sarah had been carrying. "What do you mean?" he asked softly, leaning forward. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her eyes downcast. "I've been hiding it from you, from both of you. I didn't want to burden anyone, but the truth is, I've been sick." Jonathan's eyes widened, his heart racing. "Sick?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly in disbelief. Sarah nodded, her expression resigned. "I've been dealing with health issues for a while, and I haven't been able to get the proper treatment. We've been scraping by, but I've been getting worse. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to worry you, but I can't keep pretending anymore." Jonathan felt a knot form in his stomach. He had no idea. He had known that their lives weren't easy, but this was something he hadn't expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. "You don't have to carry this alone." Sarah shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I didn't want to be a burden." "You've done so much for us already, Jonathan. You've given us a roof over our heads, food to eat. I couldn't ask for more." Jonathan's heart ached at her words. He realized then that, despite the kindness he had extended, he had never fully understood the weight of their situation. He had seen them as guests in his home, but he had never truly seen the challenges they faced. "You're not a burden, Sarah," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You and Claire are family now, and family takes care of each other." Claire looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. She reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it gently. Sarah glanced at her daughter, her eyes softening, but the worry was still there. "I don't want to impose," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. "You're not imposing," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." There was a long silence, the weight of Sarah's words hanging in the air. Jonathan could see the relief in her eyes, the sense of burden lifting just a little. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was ready to help in any way he could. He had spent so long focusing on his own wealth, on building his empire, that he had neglected the true meaning of wealth, the kind that came from love, from connection, from the people around you. He had found that wealth now, in Claire and Sarah. They were the family he never knew he needed, and he was determined to be there for them, just as they had been there for him. "We're in this together," Jonathan said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We'll figure it out." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude and relief. Claire smiled, her face lighting up as she looked at both of them. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you both for everything." Jonathan smiled back at her, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. He had come a long way from the lonely billionaire who once thought he had everything. He now knew that what he had was more precious than any fortune, a family, a purpose, and the chance to make things right. Days passed, and the weight of Sarah's confession seemed to linger in the air. Jonathan found himself thinking about her struggle more often than he expected. The mansion, once a place of isolation, now felt full of responsibility. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been living in a bubble, disconnected from the realities that others faced. Claire had become a constant presence in his life, and with her, Sarah, too, had carved out a place in his heart. He knew now that his wealth, his success, had never been enough to fill the void he had felt for so long. What he had lacked wasn't more things. It was people who truly mattered, people he could care for, and who would care for him in return. One afternoon, Jonathan decided to take action. He didn't know how to fix everything, but he had to try. Sarah's health had been deteriorating, and while she had insisted that they didn't need anything more, he knew she couldn't keep hiding the truth. He had to step in, had to help, but he also knew he had to be careful. He didn't want to make them feel indebted to him. He had spent so many years in control, and yet, in this moment, he felt vulnerable, unsure of the right thing to do. He called Sarah that afternoon, his voice steady but warm when she answered. "Sarah, I think it's time we get you the help you need, he said. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you, for both of you. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Jonathan could almost hear the hesitation in her breath. Jonathan, I told you, I don't want to be a burden, she replied softly. You've done so much already. I don't want to impose. Jonathan sighed, frustration beginning to edge into his voice. You're not a burden, Sarah. You never were. And it's not about what you owe me. It's about making sure you're okay. That's what family does for each other. You don't have to do this alone anymore. There was another long pause before Sarah spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't expect this from you, she said quietly. I didn't expect anyone to care enough to help us. But maybe it's time to accept that we can't do this on our own. Jonathan's heart ached for her. He could hear the weight of the years of struggle, the feeling of being abandoned, in her voice. You don't have to, he said softly. Let me help. Let me be here for you. After their conversation, Jonathan made the necessary arrangements. He reached out to a private healthcare provider, one that specialized in cases just like Sarah's. It wasn't just about medical treatment, it was about offering her dignity and comfort, something she hadn't had in a long time. The next day, he drove Sarah to the clinic himself, taking her hand as they walked through the door. Claire stayed behind, watching from the car, her face full of quiet gratitude. Jonathan knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew that it was the right thing to do. They spent hours at the clinic, filling out forms and getting the necessary tests done. It wasn't just about fixing what was physically broken, it was about providing Sarah with the peace of mind she deserved. As they left, Sarah turned to Jonathan, her eyes red from the tears she had held back throughout the day. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Jonathan squeezed her hand gently, his own eyes brimming with unshed tears. You don't have to thank me, he said softly. This is what family does. This is what I do now. I'm here for you, no matter what. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Sarah's health improved with the right care, and she slowly regained her strength. The emotional weight of the past few years seemed to lift, replaced by a growing sense of hope. Claire flourished in ways Jonathan hadn't expected. She began to excel at school, her confidence growing with each passing day. And Jonathan, for the first time in a long time, found himself laughing more, his days no longer filled with the hollow routines that had once defined his life. He started to realize that he had been searching for the wrong kind of success. It wasn't the empire he had built, or the wealth that surrounded him, but the connections he had made, the people who had come to mean everything to him. As Sarah and Claire settled into their new routine, Jonathan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He hadn't just helped them heal physically, he had helped them build a future, and in the process, he had built a life for himself, a life full of purpose and meaning. One evening, as they all sat together in the living room, the warmth of the fire filling the space, Claire spoke up, her voice full of emotion. Jonathan, she began, her eyes meeting his. I just want you to know how much this means to us. You didn't have to do any of this, but you did, and we're so grateful. Jonathan looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. He had never imagined that something as simple as helping someone in need could change his entire life. You don't have to thank me, Claire, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're my family now, and I'll always be here for you, both of you. Sarah smiled, her eyes full of gratitude. We're lucky to have you, Jonathan, she said softly. You've given us more than we could ever ask for. Jonathan looked around the room, at the two people who had become his world, and he realized that the life he had been searching for was right here. He had everything he needed: love, family, and the chance to make things right. And for the first time in his life, he felt complete. As the weeks went by, the changes in the mansion were undeniable. The once cold and sterile walls now seemed to hum with life. Jonathan had learned to live in a way he never had before, embracing the warmth of his home, not just the luxury of it. He woke up earlier now, not to check on his business or review contracts, but to have breakfast with Sarah and Claire. He would help Claire with her homework, laughing as she struggled with some of the math problems. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to be getting stronger every day, her smile growing wider with each passing moment. It had taken time, but she was finally finding peace. The strain in her voice had almost disappeared, replaced by a new, confident tone. Claire, too, had started to blossom in ways Jonathan hadn't expected. She was no longer the quiet, reserved girl he had first met. She had developed an infectious confidence that brought a kind of light to the mansion that had always been absent. Their presence had transformed him. Jonathan had always thought of himself as self-sufficient, someone who didn't need others. But now, he realized how wrong he had been. His life had been hollow before, filled with empty pursuits. But with Sarah and Claire in his life, he felt truly alive. One afternoon, after school, Claire came to Jonathan with a letter in her hand. She stood in front of him, holding it nervously. "What's that?" Jonathan asked, glancing at her with curiosity. Claire hesitated, biting her lip, before handing it to him. "It's from my school," she said softly. "They're offering me a scholarship. I got accepted to the gifted program." Jonathan's eyes widened. He looked at Claire, then down at the letter, a mix of pride and disbelief filling his chest. "Claire, this is incredible," he exclaimed, his voice full of emotion. "You've worked so hard for this. You deserve it." Claire smiled shyly, her face glowing with excitement, but also a little bit of uncertainty. "I'm really nervous," she admitted. "What if I don't fit in? What if I don't live up to their expectations?" Jonathan reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You will fit in," he said, his voice steady and full of assurance. "You're more than capable. This scholarship isn't just about your intelligence. It's about your heart, your determination, and I know you have both." Claire's smile widened, but she still seemed unsure. Jonathan could see the doubt in her eyes, the lingering fear that she wasn't good enough. It reminded him of his own struggles, how he had always tried to prove his worth by accumulating things, by achieving success in ways that didn't truly matter. But now, looking at Claire, he knew what really mattered. Being true to who you are, having the courage to grow, and the strength to face challenges head-on. "You're going to do great things, Claire," Jonathan said softly. "I'm proud of you, no matter what, but I'm also excited for what's to come. You've got the world in front of you, and I know you're going to make a difference." The words seemed to settle in Claire's heart, and Jonathan could see the confidence begin to return to her face. It was as if, in that moment, she understood what he had meant. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Jonathan found himself reflecting on how far they had come. It wasn't just the tangible progress, Sarah's health, Claire's achievements. It was the quiet moments, the simple acts of kindness that had made all the difference. As Sarah served dinner, she caught Jonathan's eye across the table. Her expression was soft, filled with gratitude. "You've done so much for us," she said quietly, "more than we could ever repay." Jonathan shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You don't need to repay me," he said. "I did what anyone would do for family." Claire looked up at him, her eyes bright. "I think you've done more than most people would, Jonathan," she said. "You gave us a chance to be a family again, and for that, we'll be forever grateful." Jonathan's chest tightened at her words, and for a moment, he felt the weight of everything they had been through together. He thought back to the first night Claire had knocked on his door, asking him if he wanted to have dinner with them. He had been alone then, consumed by the emptiness that his wealth had never been able to fill. And now, here he was, surrounded by the very thing he had been searching for: connection, love, and purpose. "I didn't just give you a chance," Jonathan said, his voice low but steady. "You gave me a chance too. A chance to change. A chance to understand what really matters." There was a pause, the room growing still as the three of them sat together, their hearts full. Jonathan looked around the table at Sarah and Claire, both of them smiling softly at him. They were family now, in every sense of the word. And he knew, deep down, that he would never let them go. They had come into his life when he needed them most, and together, they had built something stronger than anything he had ever known. He wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan realized that he had everything he needed to be truly happy. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Jonathan, Sarah, and Claire grew stronger. The mansion, once a symbol of Jonathan's loneliness and wealth, now felt like a true home. The laughter that filled the house was a constant reminder of how much had changed. Jonathan had found a new sense of purpose in his life, one that went beyond his businesses, beyond his empire. His purpose was now tied to Sarah and Claire. It was about making sure they were taken care of, but it was also about creating a life full of love and connection. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, Jonathan noticed Claire staring out the window, her gaze distant, her thoughts far away. She had been quiet all day, her usual energy subdued. Jonathan could sense that something was on her mind. He approached her gently, his voice soft. "Claire, is everything okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Claire turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I've just been thinking," she began, her voice tinged with uncertainty, "about everything. About the scholarship, about school. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. What if I don't fit in? What if I'm not good enough?" Jonathan listened carefully, sensing the weight of her words. He could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had once felt, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "Claire, you're more than enough. I know you're scared, but that's okay. It means you care. It means you're ready to grow. And I believe in you. You've already proven how strong you are, and this is just another step forward. You'll find your place, I promise you." Claire's eyes welled with tears, and she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Jonathan. I just don't want to disappoint anyone." Jonathan smiled warmly, squeezing her shoulder. "You won't disappoint anyone. You have nothing to prove to anyone but yourself." He paused, watching her closely. "And remember, no matter what happens, I'll be right here. You're not alone." Claire smiled back, her expression softening as she absorbed his words. For the first time in weeks, she seemed to relax. The tension in her shoulders eased, and a small but genuine smile appeared on her face. "Thanks," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "That means a lot." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, watching her for a moment before he stood up. "Come on, let's take a walk," he suggested. "I think we both need some fresh air." Claire agreed, and they stepped outside together, the cool breeze brushing against their faces. As they walked along the winding path through the estate, Jonathan felt a sense of peace settle over him. They were no longer strangers, no longer just people in the same house. They were a family. The bond they had formed was unbreakable, and he knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. As they walked in silence, Claire spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Jonathan, I've been thinking about how much my life has changed since I met you. I've never felt so at home, you know. It's like everything's different now, but in a good way." Jonathan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad you feel that way, Claire. You've made a difference in my life too. You and your mom. I've learned more from you both than I ever could have imagined." They continued walking, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. As they reached the end of the path, Jonathan stopped, turning to face Claire. "You've got this, Claire. Whatever happens next, I know you'll handle it. And I'll be here for you, every step of the way." Claire nodded, a newfound confidence in her eyes. "I know, and I won't let you down, Jonathan. I promise." The words felt like a promise to herself as much as to him. She had come so far, and with the support of Jonathan and her mother, she was ready to take on whatever came next. As they made their way back to the house, Jonathan felt a sense of contentment he hadn't experienced in years. He had built his empire on his own, but it was nothing compared to the family they had created together. He wasn't alone anymore, and he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders by himself. He had Claire, he had Sarah, and together they would face whatever the future held. Later that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Jonathan looked across the table at Sarah and Claire. The warmth of the fire flickered in the background, casting a soft glow on their faces. "You two have no idea how much you've changed my life," Jonathan said, his voice full of emotion. "I used to think I had everything, but now I know what really matters." Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "We've changed each other's lives, Jonathan," she said quietly. "You've given us more than we could ever have imagined, and for that, we will always be grateful." Claire nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We're a family now, and no matter what happens, We'll always have each other." Jonathan looked at them both, his heart full. He had found something more valuable than all the wealth in the world. He had found love, connection, and the strength of family. And he knew, as they all sat together, that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as one. The days seemed to move faster as Jonathan, Sarah, and Claire settled into their new rhythms. The mansion was no longer just a house. It had become a home, a place of warmth, laughter, and love. Jonathan found himself spending more time with Sarah and Claire, helping Claire with her studies and sharing quiet moments with Sarah, talking about life, the past, and the future. They had come so far together, and yet, there was still one thing that weighed heavily on Jonathan's mind. Despite the peace he had found with them, there was a part of him that still felt the pull of his past, the years of working tirelessly to build his empire, the sacrifices he had made along the way. He had gained so much, but at what cost? One afternoon, as Claire and Sarah were out running errands, Jonathan found himself alone in the living room, his thoughts swirling. He had been keeping something from them, something he hadn't fully confronted himself. The truth was, the mansion, his wealth, his empire, none of it felt like enough anymore. He had spent his life building an empire, but it had come at the cost of personal connections, of real human relationships. He had missed the simple joys of family, of genuine connection, and it had left him hollow. As he sat in the silence, his phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from one of his closest business partners, an update on a new project they were working on. Jonathan stared at the message for a long time, the weight of the words sinking in. He had always been so focused on success, so determined to prove himself, that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. He had been so consumed by the idea of achieving more, of acquiring more, that he hadn't stopped to consider what he was sacrificing in the process. He put the phone down and sat back in his chair, the weight of the realization hitting him hard. The empire he had built, the wealth he had accumulated, it was nothing without the people who mattered most. Jonathan stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the vast estate. The world outside seemed so vast, so full of opportunities, but in that moment, it all felt so distant. He had everything he had ever wanted, but it felt empty. The door opened, and Claire walked in, her school bag slung over her shoulder. She looked at him, her eyes immediately noticing the change in his expression. "Jonathan, are you okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Jonathan turned to her, his face softening. "I'm fine, Claire," he said, his voice quiet. "Just thinking about a lot of things." Claire walked over and sat down beside him, her presence calming. "What kind of things?" she asked, her voice gentle. Jonathan hesitated, unsure of how to explain, but looking at her, seeing the way she had grown in such a short time, he knew that she was someone who could understand. "I've spent so much of my life building this empire," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I never stopped to think about what I was sacrificing along the way. I've spent so many years chasing success that I forgot what really matters. I forgot about the people around me, the ones who care, the ones who make life worth living." Claire looked at him with quiet understanding, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "I get it," she said softly. "I think we both do. It's easy to get lost in all of this." She gestured around the room. "But what matters is the people we care about. We've learned that, right?" Jonathan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I never imagined that it would take so long for me to realize that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I've learned something important. It's not about what you have, it's about who you have beside you." Claire smiled, her expression full of warmth. "I'm glad you see that, Jonathan," she said. "Because we're all in this together. You, me, Mom, this is our family now, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." Jonathan looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had been so focused on the wrong things for so long, but now, with Claire and Sarah, he had found something that no amount of money could buy: love, connection, and purpose. "I've been selfish, Claire," Jonathan said softly. "I've spent my life building walls around myself, thinking that success was the key to happiness. But I was wrong. What I need, what we all need, is each other." Claire took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We've got you, Jonathan," she said, her voice full of assurance. "And you've got us. That's what really matters." Jonathan smiled. his heart finally at peace. "Thank you, Claire, for everything." The door opened again, and Sarah stepped inside, her eyes bright with a sense of purpose. She had been through so much, but now, with the love of her daughter and Jonathan, she was stronger than ever. She joined them in the living room, sitting down next to Claire, a soft smile on her face. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her eyes shifting between Jonathan and Claire. Jonathan looked at Sarah, his heart full. "Everything's more than okay," he said, his voice full of emotion. "It's perfect." Sarah's eyes softened, her smile growing wider. "I'm so glad to hear that," she said quietly. "You both mean the world to me." Jonathan looked at them both, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. They were his family now, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it truly meant to be wealthy, not in material things, but in love, connection, and the people who made life worth living. The weeks that followed were filled with new beginnings and new challenges. Jonathan, Sarah, and Claire had come so far together, and their bond had only deepened. Jonathan had made it his mission to be there for them, to make sure that their lives were not just comfortable but full of purpose. But even in the midst of their happiness, there were still moments of uncertainty. Moments where the weight of the world seemed to creep back in. It was on one such afternoon that Jonathan decided it was time to face the truth about his past. He had spent so many years running from it, burying himself in his business and his success. But now, surrounded by the family he had found in Sarah and Claire, he realized that he needed to confront the parts of his life that had haunted him for so long. He had spent years building an empire, but it had come at the cost of everything else: his family, his happiness, and most of all, himself. One afternoon, as Claire and Sarah were out shopping, Jonathan sat alone in the study, staring at the stacks of documents on his desk. His mind wandered to the past, to the years he had spent pushing himself to the brink, believing that more was always better. He had forgotten what it felt like to truly live, to be present. He had been so consumed by the idea of success that he had lost sight of what mattered most. As he sat there, reflecting, the door creaked open, and Claire stepped in. She had a soft smile on her face, but her eyes were filled with concern. "Jonathan, you've been so quiet today," she said, walking toward him. "Are you okay?" Jonathan looked up, meeting her gaze. He had never been one to open up about his struggles, but something about Claire made him feel safe, like he didn't have to hide anymore. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about everything, about the way I've lived my life, and the things I've missed along the way." Claire tilted her head, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Jonathan sighed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had settled on them. "I've spent so many years chasing after success, thinking that if I had enough money, power, everything, I'd be happy. But now, I realize that none of it means anything without the people who matter most. I've been so focused on building this empire that I lost sight of the most important thing: being present, being here with you and your mom." Claire looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "I get it," she said softly. "I think we all get caught up in trying to be something, trying to prove ourselves. But at the end of the day, it's the people we love that matter the most. That's what makes life worth living." Jonathan nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. He had spent so many years in isolation, trying to be something he wasn't, trying to fill a void that only love and connection could fill. But now, with Claire and Sarah, he had found what he had been searching for all along. "You're right," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't need all of this," he gestured around the study, "to be happy. I just need the people I care about. And I need to be a better person, a better friend, a better family member. I've spent so much time building something that doesn't matter. It's time to build something real." Claire smiled softly, her eyes shining with warmth. "You've already started, Jonathan," she said. "Look at what you've done for us. You've given us more than we could ever have imagined." Jonathan looked at her, his heart filled with gratitude. He had always believed that success was measured by wealth, by what you owned. But now, he understood that true success was measured by the relationships you built, the people you loved, and the way you made them feel. "I'm not perfect," he said, his voice steady but full of sincerity, "but I'm trying. I want to be here for you, for Sarah, I want to be part of this family, not just as someone who provides, but as someone who loves and supports. Claire reached out and placed her hand on his. We already know that, Jonathan, she said. We've seen it, and we're so grateful. Jonathan smiled, his heart light with the knowledge that he had found something far more precious than anything money could buy. He had found a home, a family, and a sense of belonging. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the warmth of the fire filling the room, Jonathan looked across at Sarah and Claire. It was in moments like this, in the quiet spaces between words, that he realized how far they had come. They had built something together, not just out of necessity, but out of love and trust. They were no longer strangers. They were family. I can't tell you how much you both mean to me, Jonathan said, his voice full of emotion. You've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to describe. Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with affection. We've changed each other's lives, Jonathan, she said softly, and I wouldn't change a thing. Claire nodded in agreement, her eyes shining. We're all in this together now, and nothing will ever change that. Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at them, his heart full. He had found everything he had been searching for, and it was right here, at this table, with the people who loved him. He didn't need anything else. He was finally home. Months passed, and the mansion continued to feel like a place of peace, love, and stability. Jonathan had fully embraced his role as a father figure to Claire and a partner to Sarah. He spent his days involved in their lives, from helping Claire with her homework to having quiet conversations with Sarah about their future. His business empire, once his sole focus, had taken a back seat to the more important matters at hand: family, connection, and true happiness. As time went on, Jonathan's transformation became more apparent. His life, once driven by ambition and a relentless pursuit of success, had become rooted in the simple joys of family life. He no longer measured his worth by the amount of money in his bank account or the deals he closed, but by the love and support he gave and received. He had learned, through the bond he had formed with Sarah and Claire, that the true value in life came from those you shared it with. One evening, as they sat together around the dinner table, Sarah looked across the room at Jonathan, a small smile tugging at her lips. Jonathan, she said softly, you've changed so much since we first met you. I can see it. Not just in the way you look at us, but in the way you've started living. Jonathan glanced up from his plate, his heart swelling at her words. I didn't think I was capable of change, he admitted. I was so wrapped up in my own world, in my own ambitions, that I didn't realize what I was missing. But you and Claire, you've shown me a whole new way of living, a better way. Claire smiled brightly at him from across the table. You're the best, Jonathan, she said, her voice full of warmth. You gave us everything. You gave us a chance to be a real family again. Jonathan's eyes softened, and he felt a lump form in his throat. He had always believed that giving money or material things was enough to provide for someone, but he now understood that it wasn't about wealth. It was about showing up, being there for the people you love, and creating memories that lasted a lifetime. The world outside might have been full of uncertainties, but in this home, with Sarah and Claire, Jonathan knew he had found something stable and real. It wasn't just about providing a roof over their heads or food on the table. It was about being present, truly present, in each other's lives. As the evening continued, Jonathan found himself reflecting on everything that had led him to this moment. He remembered the first time Claire had knocked on his door, asking if he wanted to have dinner with them. He had been so consumed by his own loneliness and guilt that he didn't even realize how much he needed them. And now, sitting at the table with them, surrounded by laughter and warmth, he felt like the luckiest man in the world. Sarah noticed the look on his face and smiled knowingly. I can see the wheels turning in your head, she said. Jonathan chuckled softly, his gaze shifting to Claire, who was now talking animatedly about her plans for the future. It's just hard to believe how far we've come, he said quietly. I was so lost before you both came into my life. I thought I had everything figured out, but I didn't. Not until I realized what really mattered. Sarah nodded, her expression softening. It's never too late to realize what matters most, she said, her voice filled with the wisdom she had gained over the years. We all have our own journeys, our own struggles, But the key is not to let those struggles define us. It's about learning, growing, and finding happiness in the little things. Jonathan smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He had spent so many years running from his past, from his mistakes, but now he understood that it wasn't about escaping the past, it was about learning from it and moving forward. He had finally found his place in the world, and it wasn't in the boardrooms or the financial reports. It was right here, with the people who had shown him what true happiness was. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to the future. Claire spoke excitedly about her upcoming graduation and the scholarship she had received. Jonathan listened intently, filled with pride. He knew that Claire was destined for great things, and he was more than ready to support her every step of the way. Sarah, too, had begun to consider new opportunities. She had always put her own dreams on hold to take care of Claire. But now, with Jonathan's support, she was starting to think about what she wanted for herself. Jonathan's heart swelled with pride as he listened to them talk about their hopes and dreams. He realized that, through everything, they had become a team united by love, by the experiences they had shared, and by the promise of a brighter future. Later that evening, after Claire had gone to bed and Sarah was finishing up some work, Jonathan sat on the balcony, looking out at the night sky. The stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace with himself. He had everything he needed right here. His heart was full, not because of his wealth or his accomplishments, but because of the love and connection he shared with Sarah and Claire. He didn't need anything else. This was enough. And as he sat there, looking out at the vast world beyond, Jonathan finally understood that his journey had only just begun. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the people he would continue to meet, the love he would continue to give, and the family he would continue to build. And with that thought, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. The days continued to pass, and as the seasons changed, so did the lives of Jonathan, Sarah, and Claire. Their world, once defined by loneliness and isolation, had blossomed into something filled with love, connection, and hope. Jonathan had become a man transformed, his heart now tied to the lives of the two people who had walked into his life and changed everything. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Jonathan received a call that would change the course of their lives once again. The call came from one of his business partners, a familiar name from his past. It was a deal he had worked on years ago, one that had been left on the back burner while Jonathan focused on his personal life. The deal was finally ready to go through, and it promised to be the biggest financial breakthrough of his career. As Jonathan listened to the details, his heart raced. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of years of hard work, the proof that his efforts had paid off. But as he listened, something inside him felt off. He thought about the life he had now, the family he had built, and how much that mattered to him. He had spent so much time chasing success, but now that he had found love and meaning in his life, he wasn't sure if this deal was worth it. As he hung up the phone, a sense of unease settled over him. He had always believed that success was the ultimate goal. But now, in the quiet comfort of his home, with Claire and Sarah by his side, he questioned what success truly meant. He had built his empire, but it was hollow without the people who mattered most. That evening, as Sarah and Claire sat across from him at the dinner table, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Claire, noticing the look on his face, spoke up. "Jonathan, is everything okay? You've been so quiet tonight." Jonathan looked up from his plate, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were filled with concern, and he could see that Sarah, too, was waiting for him to speak. He sighed deeply, realizing that it was time to confront his feelings. "I got a call today," he began slowly, his voice thick with uncertainty. "A deal that I've been working on for years. It's finally going through, and it could change everything for me financially. But I don't know if it's what I want anymore." Sarah looked at him with understanding, her expression softening. "Jonathan, you've been through so much to get here," she said gently. "You've worked hard, and this is your dream coming true. But if it's not what you want anymore, then maybe it's time to think about what truly matters." Jonathan nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Sarah's words resonated with him. He had spent so many years trying to prove something to himself and others, but now, He realized that the true measure of success was not in the deals he closed or the money he earned. It was in the connections he had made, the people he loved, and the life he had built. Claire leaned forward, her eyes full of wisdom. "It's not about the money, Jonathan," she said, her voice steady. "It's about who you are, what you've learned, and the way you've changed. You've given us a life we never thought we'd have. That's worth more than anything." Jonathan felt a lump in his throat, and for the first time in a long while, he realized how much he had been holding back. He had spent so many years buried in work, in the pursuit of wealth, that he had forgotten to live. But now, with Sarah and Claire, he understood what it meant to truly live. He looked at them, his heart full. "I've learned so much from both of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent so long trying to build something that would make me happy, but I never realized that I already had everything I needed. You both have given me a life full of love, and that's more than any success I could have achieved on my own." Sarah reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "We've given each other so much, Jonathan," she said softly. "But it's not about what we've given. It's about what we've become. We've become a family, and that's the greatest gift of all." Jonathan smiled, the weight of his past lifting as he embraced the present. The deal, the money, the empire, it no longer mattered to him. He had found something far more valuable, a family, love, and the opportunity to be the man he had always wanted to be. As the night wore on, they continued to talk, their voices filled with excitement for the future. They spoke about Claire's upcoming graduation, Sarah's dreams of pursuing her own passions, and Jonathan's newfound clarity. For the first time in his life, Jonathan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was no longer chasing success or trying to fill a void. He was living a life filled with meaning, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Later that evening, as the house grew quiet and the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, Jonathan stood in the living room, looking out at the world beyond. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the choices he had made, and the lessons he had learned along the way. And for the first time in his life, he felt at peace. He had everything he needed, right here, in this home. With Sarah and Claire by his side, Jonathan knew that he was ready for whatever came next. He had built a life worth living, and that was all that truly mattered. As the days passed, life in the mansions seemed to settle into a peaceful routine. Jonathan, Sarah, and Claire had truly become a family in every sense of the word. The laughter and love that filled the house each day were a stark contrast to the cold emptiness that Jonathan had once known. His relationship with Sarah and Claire had become the foundation of his life, a life that he now cherished more than anything else. As the seasons changed and the world outside began to warm with the arrival of spring, Jonathan found himself facing a new challenge, one that he had not anticipated. It was a quiet morning when Claire came to him with a letter in her hand. She was wearing a soft smile, but there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes. Jonathan looked at her, curious. "What's that?" he asked, noticing the familiar logo at the top of the letter. Claire hesitated, her fingers gripping the edges of the paper. "It's a letter from the university I applied to," she said, her voice wavering just slightly. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He had known that Claire had applied to several universities, hoping to continue her studies and pursue her dreams. But the idea of her leaving for school, leaving him and Sarah behind, was something he hadn't fully prepared for. "You've been waiting for this, right?" Jonathan asked, his voice full of encouragement. Claire nodded, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just nervous," she admitted. "What if I don't get in? What if I'm not good enough?" Jonathan stood up, walking over to her and taking the letter from her hands. He could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had once felt, fear of not being enough, of not fitting in. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady and calm. "You are more than good enough, Claire," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "I know you've worked hard for this, and whatever happens, you've already achieved so much. But I believe in you, and I'm proud of you, no matter what." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and she looked up at him, her emotions overflowing. "Thank you, Jonathan," she whispered. "I don't think I could have made it this far without you. You've always been there for me." Jonathan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He had never imagined that he could have such a profound impact on someone else's life. He had always been so focused on his own success, on building his career and his wealth. But now, with Claire, he realized that the true measure of success was the way you impacted the people you loved. He handed her the letter, his hand trembling slightly. "Go ahead, open it," he said. Claire took a deep breath, her fingers shaking as she ripped open the envelope. She unfolded the letter slowly, her eyes scanning the words on the page. For a moment, Jonathan could see her face fall, her expression unreadable. He held his breath, waiting for her reaction, and then, Claire's face lit up with the brightest smile Jonathan had ever seen. "I got in," she exclaimed, her voice filled with joy and disbelief. "I really got in." Jonathan's heart soared with happiness. He pulled her into a hug, lifting her off the ground. "I knew you would," he said, his voice full of pride. "You've earned this, Claire. You're going to do amazing things." Claire hugged him tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Thank you, Jonathan," she whispered again. "You've made everything possible. I'm not scared anymore. I know I can do this, and it's because of you." Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at her, knowing that she was about to embark on a new chapter in her life. He had been a part of her journey, and he would continue to be there for her, no matter where life took her. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the excitement in the air was palpable. Sarah, who had been listening to the news from the kitchen, walked in with a wide grin on her face. "I can't believe it, Claire," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I'm so proud of you. This is just the beginning for you." Claire beamed, her eyes shining with excitement. "I never thought I'd be here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I wasn't good enough, but now, I know I can do anything." Jonathan watched the two of them, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. They had both come so far, and the future was wide open for them. Claire had achieved something incredible, and Sarah's support had been a constant throughout it all. Jonathan's role in their lives had shifted. He had started as a man looking for purpose, and now, he had found a family, a reason to wake up every morning, and a legacy to leave behind. The evening continued with laughter and conversation, and as the night drew to a close, Jonathan found himself reflecting on everything they had been through together. There was a time when he would have never imagined his life like this, full of love, full of meaning. He had built his wealth with one hand, but with the other, he had helped create something far more valuable, a family. And now, as Claire prepared to take the next step in her life, Jonathan knew that the best was yet to come. No matter where life took them, they would always be together. The bond they shared could never be broken, and Jonathan knew that he would always be there, not just as a provider, but as a father, a friend, and a source of love and support. The future was uncertain, but one thing was certain: their family would face it together, stronger than ever. The excitement in the house continued to build as Claire prepared for her upcoming journey to college. It felt like the start of something new, not just for her, but for their whole family. Jonathan had spent the last several years focusing on building a life of wealth and success. But now he realized that the most important thing he had built wasn't a business empire, it was the bond he shared with Sarah and Claire. Each day, he watched Claire grow into a young woman who was full of potential, ready to take on the world, and he couldn't help but feel immense pride. The day before Claire's departure to the university, Jonathan decided to take them out to celebrate, to mark this special moment in their lives. It was a beautiful evening, and they went to a local restaurant Claire had always wanted to try. The meal was delicious, but the real joy came from the conversation. They shared stories, laughed about old memories, and talked about the future. Claire, who had always been a bit reserved about her dreams, seemed more open than ever, sharing her excitement about starting this new chapter. "I still can't believe it's happening," Claire said, her eyes glowing with anticipation. "It feels like I've been waiting for this day forever," Jonathan smiled, watching her. "You've earned this, Claire," he said. "You've worked hard, and I know you're going to do amazing things." Sarah, sitting beside Jonathan, placed her hand on his. She smiled at Claire, her eyes full of love and pride. "We're so proud of you, Claire," Sarah said softly. "This is just the beginning. You're going to achieve everything you set your mind to." Claire smiled, her face lighting up as she looked between her two biggest supporters. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I wouldn't be here without both of you." The conversation moved toward the future, and Jonathan felt a deep sense of contentment. As much as he was going to miss having Claire around every day, he knew this was a huge opportunity for her. It was something she had worked for, something she had earned with her intelligence, hard work, and determination. As they finished dinner, Jonathan realized that this moment, this feeling, was everything he had been looking for all along. It wasn't about wealth or accomplishments. It wasn't about success in the traditional sense. It was about the connections he had made, the love he had found, and the family he had built. That night, when they returned to the mansion, Jonathan found himself sitting in the living room, looking out at the moonlit garden. The house was quiet now, with Claire already in her room packing for her big day. Sarah joined him on the couch, and they sat in silence for a while, just enjoying each other's company. "You've done so much for her, Jonathan," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. "You've given her the chance to have the life she deserves. You've shown her what it means to love, to care, and to be there for someone." Jonathan turned to her, his heart swelling with emotion. "She's taught me so much too, Sarah. I was lost for so long, thinking that success was everything. But now, I know what really matters. It's you, it's Claire, it's the family we've become. That's the real success." Sarah smiled at him, her eyes soft with love. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said. Jonathan nodded. "We really have," he said. "I never imagined this for myself. I didn't know it was possible to feel this way. I thought I had everything, but it turns out, this is everything." Sarah leaned in, her voice quiet and full of affection. "I'm glad we found each other, Jonathan. I'm glad we built this together." Jonathan looked at her, his heart full. He knew that, even though Claire was about to embark on her own journey, the three of them would always be a family. Their bond was unbreakable, and it would only continue to grow stronger with time. The next morning, Claire stood in front of the door with her suitcase packed, ready to leave for university. Jonathan and Sarah stood beside her, both of them filled with mixed emotions. They were proud of her, but the thought of her leaving was hard to accept. "I'm going to miss you so much," Jonathan said, pulling Claire into a tight hug. "But I know you're going to do great things, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Claire hugged him back, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll miss you too, Jonathan, but I'll make you proud, I promise." She pulled back, wiping away a tear. "Thank you for everything." Sarah stepped forward, her arms wide open. "You've got this, Claire," she said, her voice steady but full of love. "We believe in you." Claire stepped into her mother's embrace, her face breaking into a smile as she felt the warmth of Sarah's arms around her. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, "for always being there for me." After a long moment, Claire picked up her suitcase, and Jonathan and Sarah walked her to the car. As she got into the vehicle, ready to start the next chapter of her life, she turned to look at them, her eyes filled with both sadness and excitement. "I love you both," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." Jonathan and Sarah watched as the car drove away, knowing that this was just the beginning of Claire's journey. They would always be there for her, supporting her every step of the way. As the car disappeared from view, Jonathan turned to Sarah. "We've given her everything," he said quietly. "And now, she's ready to take on the world." Sarah smiled, taking his hand. "And she'll do it, Jonathan, because she has everything she needs: love, strength, and the knowledge that no matter what, we'll always be here." Jonathan nodded, watching the horizon as the sun began to rise. They had done everything they could for Claire. The rest was up to her. And in his heart, Jonathan knew that no matter what came next, they had already built a future filled with love and possibility. The days after Claire's departure to college were quiet, yet filled with a sense of bittersweet pride. Jonathan and Sarah adjusted to the new normal, their house feeling both emptier and fuller at the same time. There was a silence where Claire's laughter and chatter once filled the air. But there was also a deeper connection between Jonathan and Sarah, a bond that had been forged through the ups and downs of the past few years. Jonathan had always been used to solitude. But now, without Claire in the house every day, he felt a different kind of solitude, a kind that allowed him to reflect on how much he had changed, how far he had come. He had spent years chasing success and wealth, believing that those things would bring him happiness. But now, as he sat in the quiet of his home with Sarah, He realized that the true measure of his success wasn't in the empire he had built, but in the love he had found, the family he had created. Sarah noticed the change in him as well. She had seen Jonathan at his most driven, at his most focused, but now she saw a gentler side of him. They spent their evenings together, talking about the past, the present, and the future. They made plans, shared hopes, and talked about how proud they were of Claire. As much as they missed her, they both knew that this was the natural course of life. She was growing, changing, and finding her own path. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, Sarah turned to Jonathan. "You've done so much for her, Jonathan," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You've given her the tools she needs to succeed, and the love that will guide her along the way. I'm so proud of you for everything you've done." Jonathan smiled, his heart full. "We've done it together, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. "She's our daughter, and watching her grow into the person she's becoming, it's the greatest gift I could ever ask for. I've learned more from both of you than I ever could have imagined." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, filled with love, understanding, and unspoken gratitude. Jonathan thought about how much had changed since Claire had come into his life. He had been lost for so long, caught up in the pursuit of things that didn't matter. But now, with Sarah and Claire, he knew that he had found the meaning he had been searching for all along. The next morning, Jonathan received a call from Claire. Her voice was filled with excitement and energy as she told him about her first week at college, the new friends she had made, and the classes she was enjoying. Jonathan listened intently, his heart swelling with pride. He had always known she was capable of great things, but hearing the joy in her voice, knowing that she was thriving, made him feel a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. "I'm so proud of you, Claire," Jonathan said, his voice full of emotion. "It sounds like you're really finding your place there. I'm glad you're happy." Claire's voice softened. "Thank you, Jonathan. I miss you and Mom so much, but I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I wouldn't be here without you both." Jonathan felt a lump in his throat. "You'll always have us, Claire," he said quietly. "You're never alone, no matter where life takes you." After the call ended, Jonathan sat back, reflecting on how far they had come. He thought about the quiet nights they had spent in the mansion, the small moments that had brought them closer, and how they had all grown together. Jonathan had been the one to provide for them, to give them a roof over their heads, but in the end, it was Sarah and Claire who had truly given him a home. They had shown him what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. That evening, Jonathan and Sarah sat down for dinner, the table now quieter with Claire's absence, but still full of warmth and love. "I'm so proud of her," Sarah said softly, looking down at her plate. "She's doing exactly what she's meant to do." Jonathan nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "I am too," he said quietly. "And it's not just because of what she's achieving. It's because she's become someone who believes in herself, someone who knows her worth. And that's the best gift we could ever give her." Sarah reached across the table, her hand finding his. "And we've given each other that, Jonathan. We've found our worth in each other, in this family." Jonathan looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I never thought I would have this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent so long searching for something that I didn't even know I had. You and Claire have changed my life. I'm grateful for every single moment." Sarah smiled at him, her eyes soft with affection. "We've changed each other's lives," she said quietly. "And together, we'll keep changing. We'll keep growing." Jonathan smiled back, the weight of the past few years settling into his heart. He had learned the most important lesson of all, not from business or wealth, but from love, from family, and from the connections that truly mattered. The future felt open and bright, and no matter what came next, he knew that he, Sarah, and Claire would face it together. It was a future full of possibilities, a future they would build together, hand in hand. Months passed, and with each passing day, Jonathan, Sarah, and Claire continued to adjust to their new normal. The house was no longer filled with the emptiness of solitude, but rather the subtle hum of life, laughter, conversation, and the occasional quiet moments that made everything feel right. Jonathan had become more than just a man of wealth and business success. He had become a father figure, a partner, and a constant presence in the lives of those who mattered most to him. He had come to realize that the things he had once chased after money, status, recognition paled in comparison to the love and connection he shared with Sarah and Claire. Claire had settled into her college life, excelling in her classes and making new friends. Though they missed her, Jonathan and Sarah were proud of how far she had come. She had always been a driven and focused young woman, and now she was finding her place in the world. As for Jonathan, he spent his days managing his business, but his heart was no longer consumed by it. He had found a new balance, one where family came first, and everything else fell into place. One afternoon, Jonathan sat in his office, going over some documents when his phone rang. It was Claire. He smiled as he answered, "Hey kiddo, how's everything going?" Claire's voice came through, full of excitement and energy. "Dad, I've got something to tell you," she said. Jonathan's heart raced with anticipation. "What is it? You sound like you've got big news." Claire took a deep breath, her voice trembling with excitement. "I've been selected for a summer internship at a law firm here. It's everything I've dreamed of, and I'm so excited." Jonathan's face lit up, his chest swelling with pride. "That's amazing, Claire. I knew you'd make it happen." Claire's voice softened. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You've always believed in me, and that's what got me here." Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat as he heard the emotion in her voice. "You've always had it in you, Claire. You've worked so hard, and I'm just so proud of you." They spoke for a little while longer, with Claire telling him about her plans for the summer and how the internship was a huge opportunity. Jonathan listened intently, his heart filled with pride as he imagined her thriving in this new chapter of her life. After the call ended, Jonathan sat back in his chair, reflecting on how much had changed. Not long ago, he had been lost in the pursuit of wealth and recognition. But now he had everything that truly mattered: a family, a sense of purpose, and the love that he had been searching for all along. Later that evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Jonathan shared the good news with Sarah. "She's going to be interning at a law firm this summer," he said, his voice filled with joy. "I couldn't be more proud of her." Sarah smiled warmly, her eyes shining with affection. "She's so determined," she said softly. "She's going to do amazing things." Jonathan nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at Sarah. "She's already doing them," he said quietly, "and I know this is just the beginning for her. I just never realized how much of an impact I could have on her life. She's everything to me." Sarah reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "You've always been there for her, Jonathan," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "And she knows it. She's so lucky to have you, and we're both lucky to have you." Jonathan smiled, the warmth of her words filling him with a sense of peace he had never known. The path he had taken had been long and winding, but he had found his way. The love he shared with Sarah and Claire was worth more than any success he had achieved, more than any empire he could have built. They were his family, and that was all he needed. Over the next few weeks, as Claire prepared for her internship and Sarah pursued her own passions, Jonathan took the time to reflect on everything he had learned. He had spent so much of his life chasing after something that wasn't real, something that could never fulfill him. But now, surrounded by the people he loved, he realized that he had everything he could ever want. As the months passed and the summer approached, Jonathan found himself feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had everything he needed: love, connection, and the opportunity to build a future with his family. When Claire came home for the summer, the house was filled with excitement once again. They talked about her internship, about the new friends she had made, and about all the things she was learning. Jonathan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride as he listened to her speak, knowing that she was on the path to greatness. But more than that, he felt a sense of peace. He had given her the foundation she needed to succeed, and now it was up to her to carve out her own future. That night, as they sat together, the weight of the world seemed to lift. They were a family strong, united, and ready for whatever the future held. Jonathan had learned that success wasn't about what you had or what you could achieve. It was about the people you loved and the way you made them feel. He had built his empire, but it was the love of his family that had truly made him feel like a success. As they sat together, sharing stories and laughter, Jonathan knew that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along, a life full of meaning, a life full of love. As the summer passed, the changes in their family continued to unfold. Jonathan, Sarah, and Claire had found new ways to grow together, to adjust to the new rhythms of their lives. Claire had started her internship at the law firm, and Jonathan couldn't have been more proud of her. Her confidence had soared as she found herself surrounded by mentors and new friends, all while gaining real-world experience that would shape her future. It was incredible for Jonathan to watch her blossom, not just in her studies, but in the way she carried herself. She was becoming the young woman he had always known she could be, a confident, intelligent, and driven individual, ready to take on the world. Jonathan had always been someone who valued hard work and success, but seeing Claire thrive made him realize that it was not just about individual achievement. It was about the love, support, and trust you gave to others, the way you helped them find their own path. As the days turned into weeks, Jonathan and Sarah had more time for themselves. They'd spent so many years focused on Claire's needs, and now, as she began to carve out her own space in the world, Jonathan and Sarah found themselves reconnecting in ways they hadn't before. Their evenings were filled with long talks about the future, about their hopes for Claire, and about their own dreams, too. For the first time in years, they had the space to think about what came next for them as a couple, and how they could continue to build a life together. One evening, as the sun set and the warm breeze drifted through the open windows, Jonathan and Sarah sat in the living room, just enjoying the quiet. Sarah, who had always been a steady presence in Jonathan's life, broke the silence. "You know, Jonathan, I've been thinking about how far we've come," she said softly. Jonathan turned to her, his heart swelling with appreciation for her strength and love. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, his voice full of gratitude. "I never imagined I'd have a life like this, a family, love, and purpose. It's more than I ever thought I needed." Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening with warmth. "It's more than we both thought we needed," she said. "But we found it, together, and now we have a chance to build the next chapter of our lives." Jonathan took a deep breath, considering her words. He had always been driven by ambition, by the desire to prove something to himself, to others, to the world. But now, with Sarah and Claire by his side, he realized that everything he had worked for had led him to this point. It wasn't about more money or bigger accomplishments. It was about the relationships that grounded him, the love that had filled the emptiness he had once felt. He reached for Sarah's hand, holding it gently. "I've learned more about myself in the past few years than I ever thought possible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I've learned that the most important things in life are the people you love, the family you build, and the moments you share together. Everything else is just noise." Sarah squeezed his hand in return, her smile never fading. "You're right," she said. "I think that's something we both had to learn. We've spent so much time looking for success in all the wrong places. But now, we have everything we need." Jonathan nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. The decisions he had made, the path he had chosen, had led him here, to this moment. He no longer needed to prove anything. He had everything he could ever want: a loving partner, a daughter who was becoming her own person, and a home filled with warmth. As the days continued to pass, Jonathan and Sarah began to think more about their future together. They had always focused on Claire's future, but now it was time to consider their own. There was so much more they wanted to do: places to visit, goals to achieve, and dreams to fulfill. They had spent years living for others, but now they were ready to live for themselves, too. It wasn't about abandoning Claire or their responsibilities. It was about finding a new balance, one where they could continue to support Claire while also pursuing their own happiness and growth. One evening, as Jonathan and Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sunset together, they talked about their future plans. "We've given so much to Claire, and we'll always be there for her," Jonathan said, his voice thoughtful. "But I think it's time we start thinking about ourselves a little more. What do we want to do next? What's next for us?" Sarah nodded, her eyes shining. "I've been thinking about that too. We've spent so many years focused on her, and now that she's becoming independent, we have the chance to explore our own passions. We can do so much together, Jonathan. We've built a life that's full of love, and now we get to build something new for ourselves." Jonathan smiled, feeling a sense of excitement stir within him. For so many years, He had been so focused on achieving, on proving his worth. But now, with Sarah by his side, he felt like they were starting a new chapter together, one where they could explore new possibilities, travel, experience new things, and, most importantly, continue to build the kind of life that mattered. The future felt wide open, full of opportunities for growth, love, and adventure. Jonathan realized that as much as he had learned from Claire, he still had so much to learn from life, from Sarah, and from himself. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to embrace whatever came next. As the months passed, the change in Jonathan was unmistakable. His days no longer revolved solely around his empire. He had found a balance that was new and refreshing, one where his family came first. His relationship with Sarah had deepened, and though Claire was away at college, Jonathan continued to be incredibly proud of the young woman she was becoming. Claire had come into her own, thriving in her new environment, and Jonathan found joy in her progress. He could see her becoming more independent and confident, and in a way, it gave him a sense of fulfillment to know that he had played a part in her growth. But now, the changes in Jonathan were not just about his family, they were also about his relationship with himself. He had always defined success by how much he achieved, by how much he had accumulated, but that definition had changed. He no longer felt the need to prove his worth to anyone, including himself. It was something that had taken him years to realize. With Sarah and Claire, he had found the kind of wealth that mattered, the kind that couldn't be measured in numbers or material possessions. It was the wealth of love, connection, and shared moments that made his life richer than anything he could have imagined. One day, as Jonathan sat at his desk, working through some emails, he realized that he hadn't checked in with Claire in a few days. He missed their talks, the way she would share the small details of her life with him, and the excitement in her voice when she told him about something new she was learning. He picked up the phone and dialed her number, hoping she would answer. When Claire picked up, her voice was light, filled with warmth. "Hey Dad, how's everything going?" Jonathan smiled, hearing the familiar tone. "Everything's good," he replied. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. How's the internship going?" Claire immediately launched into an excited summary of her days at the law firm, telling Jonathan about the people she had met, the cases she had worked on, and how much she was learning. Jonathan listened, his heart swelling with pride. He had always believed in her abilities. But hearing her talk so confidently, so assured of her place in the world, made him realize just how much she had grown. "I'm really proud of you, Claire," Jonathan said when she paused for a breath. "You've worked hard for this, and I'm so glad to hear that you're enjoying it. It sounds like you're right where you're supposed to be." Claire's voice softened, a hint of emotion creeping in. "I miss you and Mom," she said, "but I'm also really happy here. I feel like I'm finally figuring things out, you know?" Jonathan's heart ached slightly at the thought of her being so far away, but he was glad to hear that she was content. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice full of emotion. "And no matter what, you always have us. We're here, cheering you on every step of the way." They talked for a few more minutes before saying their goodbyes. And as Jonathan ended the call, he sat back in his chair, feeling a sense of pride and contentment. Claire was doing well, thriving in ways he had hoped for her, and that gave him a sense of peace. He had done what he could as a father. He had supported her, loved her, and given her the tools to succeed. The rest was up to her, and she was more than ready. As the weeks went by, Jonathan found that his thoughts often drifted to his future with Sarah. They had spent so many years focusing on Claire's growth and education, but now it was time to think about what they wanted for themselves. They had already built a life together, but the question was, what came next? One evening, after dinner, Jonathan and Sarah sat together on the couch, discussing their plans. "You know," Jonathan began, "we've done everything we could for Claire. She's in college, she's getting the experience she needs, and she's thriving, but I've been thinking what's next for us." Sarah looked at him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said. "We've spent so many years focusing on Claire's future, and now that she's finding her way, it's time for us to think about our own dreams." Jonathan nodded, feeling a sense of excitement building within him. "I've always wanted to travel," he said thoughtfully. "I've spent so much of my life chasing success, but now I want to see the world, experience things I've never had the time for." Sarah's eyes brightened, and she leaned in closer. "I'd love that," she said. "I've always dreamed of traveling, but I've never had the time. Now that Claire is growing up and becoming independent, maybe it's time for us to do something for ourselves." Jonathan smiled, feeling a sense of exhilaration. For so long, he had been focused on what he could give to others, but now it was time to consider what they could give to themselves. They had created a beautiful life, and now it was time to enjoy it, to make memories that were just for them. Over the next few months, Jonathan and Sarah made plans for their future. They talked about the places they wanted to visit, the experiences they wanted to share, and the adventures they could have together. They realized that this was their time, a time to embrace the next chapter of their lives, not as parents, but as individuals and as a couple. They had always put others first, and now it was time to prioritize their own dreams. As they made their plans, Jonathan reflected on how much his life had changed. He had gone from a man focused solely on success to someone who understood the true value of life. It wasn't about wealth or accomplishments, it was about the relationships you built, the love you shared, and the experiences that made life worth living. And now, with Sarah by his side, he felt ready to take on whatever came next. Together, they would explore the world, build new memories, and continue to grow just as they always had, side by side. As the months went by, Jonathan and Sarah settled into a new rhythm. Their lives, once driven by the rush of daily tasks and the demands of raising Claire, had shifted into a slower, more deliberate pace. Claire was thriving at college, and Jonathan had begun to see his role not just as a father, but as a partner, someone who shared not only the joys of family life but also the excitement of future possibilities with Sarah. They had talked about traveling, and those conversations had quickly turned into plans. They began to map out destinations, dream about new experiences, and finally, for the first time in a long time, they focused on the future they wanted to create together. It wasn't just about vacations or escape, it was about experiencing life together, building memories they had put on hold for so many years. One evening, Jonathan and Sarah sat together on the balcony, watching the sunset as they talked about the places they wanted to visit. "There's so much I want to see," Sarah said softly, her eyes on the horizon. "I think we both have a lot of catching up to do. We've always put everyone else first, but now it's time for us to live for ourselves too." Jonathan nodded, a warm feeling spreading in his chest as he looked at her. "It's been a long time coming," he said, his voice steady, but full of emotion. "We've given everything we had to Claire, and now it's time to focus on ourselves. I think it'll be good for us. We've earned it." Sarah smiled at him, squeezing his hand. "We have," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength, "and we're going to make the most of it. There's so much more to see and do, and we've got each other for the journey." Over the next few months, Jonathan and Sarah made the necessary preparations. They cleared their schedules, arranged for Claire to visit them during the breaks, and made sure everything at home was in order. They wanted this time for themselves, a break from the responsibilities they had carried for so long. The first trip they took was to Italy, a place Sarah had always dreamed of visiting. They spent weeks planning every detail, from the cities they wanted to explore to the quiet corners of the countryside they hoped to discover. It was an adventure of a lifetime, and for the first time in a long while, Jonathan felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. They walked through the cobbled streets of Rome, took in the breathtaking beauty of the Tuscan countryside, and sat in outdoor cafes, talking about everything and nothing at all. It was a chance to reconnect with each other and with themselves, to breathe, to take in the beauty of the world and the possibilities ahead of them. As they traveled through Italy, Jonathan found himself thinking back to how far he had come. He had spent so many years consumed by the idea of success, working tirelessly to build an empire that he thought would define him. But now, sitting beside Sarah at a cafe, watching the sun set over the hills of Florence, he realized that his true success wasn't in the wealth he had accumulated. It was in the relationships he had nurtured, in the love he had found, and in the life he had built with the people who mattered most. It wasn't the destination, it was the journey, and the journey had led him here, to this moment of peace and fulfillment. As they traveled through different parts of Europe, Jonathan felt the same joy he had found at home, only now it was shared with Sarah. Their conversations deepened, their bond strengthened, and they found themselves talking about their next steps, not just in life, but in their relationship with each other. They began to make plans not just for the near future but for the long term, discussing what they wanted their life to look like when Claire had graduated, when they were ready to embrace a new chapter of their own. "We've been so focused on Claire's future for so long," Sarah said one night as they sat under the stars in a quiet corner of Paris. "But now, we have a chance to focus on what comes next for us. What kind of life do we want to create, Jonathan?" Jonathan thought for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. "I want a life that's full of love and experiences," he said slowly. "I don't want to spend another day working for the sake of working. I want to spend my days doing things that matter, with the people I care about." Sarah smiled, her hand resting on his. "That sounds perfect," she said. "We've spent so many years putting others first. It's time to live for ourselves, too." Jonathan nodded, the clarity of his thoughts becoming more and more defined. He realized that, just as Claire was finding her way, it was time for him and Sarah to do the same. They had given so much to Claire, to each other, and to the people they loved. Now, it was time to create a new adventure, a new life together. Their travels had opened his eyes to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The world was theirs to explore, and with Sarah by his side, he knew that anything was possible. As they boarded the plane for their next destination, Jonathan felt a deep sense of peace settle within him. He had everything he had ever wanted, not in material things, but in love, connection, and the chance to experience the world alongside the people who mattered most. No matter where they went, no matter what came next, he knew they would face it together stronger than ever, ready for whatever the future held. As the years continued to pass, Jonathan and Sarah's life together became more fulfilling than they had ever imagined. The adventures they had taken, the places they had seen, and the experiences they had shared made their bond stronger than ever. They were no longer the same people who had been lost in the pursuit of success. They had evolved, not just as individuals, but as partners, as a family. With Claire now well into her studies and her future ahead of her, Jonathan and Sarah found themselves reflecting on everything they had accomplished. They had given everything to Claire, and now, they were learning how to live for themselves, how to create new dreams for their own future. There was a sense of peace that settled over them, a feeling that the journey they had been on had brought them to exactly where they were meant to be. It wasn't about the wealth they had accumulated or the titles they had earned, it was about the love they shared and the connections they had made. Their home had become a place of warmth, laughter, and understanding. It was no longer just a house, it was their sanctuary, a reflection of the life they had built together. Sarah had decided to pursue her own dreams more actively. With the support of Jonathan, she began to explore her passions and create new goals for herself. Jonathan, too, began to invest more of his time in his personal passions, focusing on things that brought him joy beyond his business achievements. They had realized that life wasn't just about what they could give others, it was also about what they could give to themselves. They had spent so many years focusing on their family's needs, on Claire's growth, and on building a future for her. Now, it was their time to explore what came next for them. It was during one of their evening talks that Sarah looked at Jonathan and asked, "What do you think we'll be doing 5 years from now?" Jonathan paused, considering her question. It wasn't something he had thought about in the past, but now, with the life they had built, he could see a future full of endless possibilities. "I think we'll be continuing to enjoy life, traveling, exploring new places, but most importantly, I think we'll be finding new ways to give back, to make the world around us a little better," he said, his voice steady with the confidence of knowing that no matter where life took them, they would face it together. Sarah smiled at him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I think you're right," she said softly. "We've been through so much, but now, we get to focus on what truly matters to us. We get to write our own story, one that's full of love, purpose, and adventure." Jonathan took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's not just about the destination," he said. "It's about the people we've become along the way, the connections we've made, and the moments that have shaped us. This life, our life, it's everything I've ever wanted." Over the next few years, Jonathan and Sarah continued to live their lives with intention, enjoying their time together while still remaining present for Claire. They found themselves supporting her as she continued her journey toward her career, but also embracing their own passions and goals. They traveled to new places, experienced new cultures, and deepened their understanding of themselves and the world around them. Their relationship only grew stronger with time, and Jonathan found that the wealth he had been chasing for so long paled in comparison to the richness of his life now. He didn't need material success to feel fulfilled. What mattered was the love he shared with Sarah, the bond they had with Claire, and the joy they found in their shared adventures. As the years passed, Jonathan looked back on the man he had once been. He had been consumed by the need to prove himself, to show the world that he could succeed. But now, he understood that true success wasn't about proving anything. It was about living authentically, about cherishing the moments that really mattered, and about finding peace in the connections you made along the way. Claire had grown into a confident, capable woman, and Jonathan and Sarah knew that they had done their part to give her the foundation she needed. As they continued to support her, they also supported each other, learning and growing together. Their family had become the most important thing in their lives, and they had built something that could not be measured in dollars or accolades. It was something far more valuable: love, trust, and the unwavering support they had for one another. And as they sat together one evening, watching the sunset over the horizon, Jonathan knew that they had created a legacy that would last a lifetime, a legacy built on love, family, and the simple joys of life. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Sarah said, looking at him with a soft smile. Jonathan nodded, his heart full. "Yes," he replied, "and I wouldn't change a thing." Together, they had built a life that mattered. And no matter where the future took them, they knew that they would always have each other. And that was all they needed.